Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the Two Mats podcast.
Welcome to the Two Mats podcast.
Brought to you, as ever, by the fantastic subscribers to the New European newspaper. God bless them all. Well, it's been a hell of a week.
It has, and we're recording this before Keir Starmer has his momentous meeting with Donald Trump.
Yep.
In the White House, but we'll have a lot to say about all that.
Yep.
And I thought it might be worth getting a blast of what one of the many things Trump said at his rather Politburo-ish cabinet meeting yesterday, Wednesday. So maybe we can have a blast of that.
But I love the countries of Europe. I love all countries, frankly, all different. But the European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
So that's about as candid as it gets. And I know that Starmer is not there today representing the European Union, but it's very clear what part of what this is all about.
Yeah. It's fascinating to hear him use that kind of language.
Yes.
But it's an iteration of something he's been quite consistent about. He said in 2017 that the European Union was destructive to the United States, and that there was a definite agenda that in his head to do the European Union down. And now we've been speaking in the last couple of podcasts about Trump's apparent indifference to the fate of Europe. There's a very interesting question now as to whether it's more than that, whether actually there's a definite, deliberate, strategic attempt to destroy the European Union as a competitive trade bloc.
Well, I think there is, and I think that he and Vladimir Putin share an interest in doing down the European Union, and they see it, both of them, as a competitor, obviously in trade and potentially in defence, I suppose. But also, I think that he's teeing up a sort of carving up process where, I mean, we'll get into this when we talk about Starmer, but Europe does the peacekeeping in Ukraine. The benefits of the new plan for minerals is shared out between Ukraine, the US, and one suspects Russia. And, you know, our troops, the EU plus UK, are there to keep the peace, which is he clearly takes us for suckers. I mean, he often frames things as the rest of the world taking America for suckers and fleecing them. But actually, he's trying to spin it. So, I mean, I wonder if it's useful to start with Starmer.
Yeah.
So first of all, we haven't talked since Starmer made his big defence offer in the Commons. And I don't know what you felt about that, but my initial thought was, oh, good. And then it's slightly unravelled, hasn't it?
It has unravelled a bit. The headline figures aren't all they seem.
Not at all.
And also my concern is that there is David Lammy, for instance, very recently, obviously he's had to sort of come in line, but very recently said, when Britain dropped its overseas development commitments, it was obviously a big mistake, and they spent a lot of time repairing that mistake. And this idea of overseas aid, people should be really clear about what that is. It's not just donations to poor people.
Not at all.
It has self-interest embedded within it.
Completely. I mean, I always think there's a triad of in defence and security. There's actual defence, the armed forces, intelligence and development. And just to really go way, way back, I remember in the early days of conservative modernisation being in George Osborne's kitchen with a guy called Jeffrey Sachs, who's a professor at Columbia University, and he's gone a bit strange on things recently, but at the time much hailed because he'd written what remains the best book on international development called The End of Poverty. And he was selling, these are conservatives, remember, and they bought it, this whole idea that by ring fencing a minimal amount of your revenue or GDP, you could achieve unbelievable things, literally pennies in the pound on to buy malaria nets, could save hundreds of thousands of lives. And obviously that was a good thing to do, but also the impact upon the developing world was huge. The education of women, which is famously, one of the key things in any society's development, was, if you invested in that, a society come back in 20 years and it's transformed. And it was fascinating seeing what will go on to become the leading figures of the coalition, really buying this and ring fencing the 0.7, and then that went down to 0.5 under Boris Johnson, and now it's gone down to 0.3. And I do think I felt this was a very bad way of making up the difference on security, because for two reasons. One is that the aid budget has already been massacred, and a lot of it is being diverted already to housing asylum seekers, so it's not going abroad at all. But B, it was obviously done performatively, wasn't it? It was done to impress Trump, and I suppose reform voters. But Trump will like the fact that Starmer is paying for more defence by taking money out of those suffering millennial poverty around the world.
But there is also this fact about the self-interest, the geopolitical self-interest. It's ask yourselves this question, dear listeners: why does a nation like China, which is an emerging nation, why does China invest so much money in overseas aid in the Belt and Road project? Billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars in developing African nations. It's not necessarily just so that you can get from A to B quicker in Africa. It's because there is a huge upswell of goodwill towards China and leverage for the Chinese government in those countries. Now, that applies both to combating terrorist threat, but it also applies to economic relationships, commercial relationships, the whole picture. And as this world that is in flux forms, it's more important than ever to have influence with other nations. And that's something we're stepping back from now.
It's like culture spending. People moan about that, but actually the return on investment is spectacular. So I was dismayed that he was doing something so zero-sum gain. And, you can just hear Morgan McSweeney and Pat McFadden saying to him, that's his chief of staff and his cabinet office minister, saying to him, this will play well with reform. This will play well with reform voters. And I don't know whether it will or not, but I think the stakes are now so much higher than prospective by-elections in Runcorn and Helsby, which is coming up, which reform might try and win from Labour. And I understand that. But we're talking massive geopolitical swings at the moment. And I think that it's good that we're going to spend, we now know that the 2.5% on defence will now be done in 2027. It's still not very much, but okay, good. And that they'll go 4-3 in the next parliament, fine. But I think the idea that, first of all, the first step was to do it on the backs of the most impoverished of the world was unforgivable. And the second is that it gives a false sense of security, in the sense that actually we're going to have to take money through tax or borrowing or other mechanisms in order to spend more on defence, not just by carving up the aid budget. And I think that Starmer will have to start very soon a conversation about that.
Totally. And I think, again, this idea that we can't raise taxes just because they put it into the manifesto because that was seen to match the Tories' manifesto, I think that is becoming a real millstone now. And maybe we should enter a world of hypothecated taxation for greater defence. But I always think it never ends well when foreign policy dominates a government's agenda, because we have got so many domestic challenges that need addressing, that you can almost feel Wes Streeting kind of hunched over his desk thinking, what about the bloody NHS? It wasn't that what we set out to fix.
No, that's true. Although you can't, the problem of foreign policy is you can't,
you can't avoid it. It's like the weather.
You can't dictate. It's like the weather. Exactly. Literally, in some cases. I think that on this, on Sunday, there's going to be a gathering in London where Vladimir Zelensky and lots of European leaders are going to come, which is a good sign that this new European defence identity might see London as its kind of spiritual home. But one of the things that's getting a little bit of airtime in Whitehall and other European countries is that we really do need to start looking at some form of collective borrowing, or a bank, or something that enables Europe, including the UK, to spend more collectively. And this is a whole new world, because we've there's too much duplication. Our procurement systems are unaligned. We're going to have to start from scratch almost on this. But I think it's really important that defence spending not be seen as a narrowly national thing, but as something that we do collectively.
Yeah.
And I'm actually more interested in a funny way about the Sunday meeting than I am about what goes on today. Having said that, Starmer does have this obsession with Trump offering US support as what he calls the backstop.
Yes.
In Ukraine.
And I'm not clear what he means by backstop.
Well, I think the point is that Trump will not use the word guarantee. In fact, he says, he said in that cabinet meeting in terms that he's not going to offer a security guarantee.
Yeah.
So I think the backstop is language which is designed diplomatically to enable him to offer something which doesn't involve America feeling that it's being giving a defense guarantee, right? Now, what this means in practice is very straightforward, which is the stuff that only America can do, which is to do with logistics, surveillance, and so on. And Starmer's right that at the moment, because we're talking about pretty soon, probably, only America can provide the kind of satellite logistic surveillance capacity that is going to be needed if we are going to send peacekeepers to Ukraine.
And I keep hearing more specifically about air power.
Yes.
That only the Americans can adequately guarantee air superiority.
That is where I think perhaps the rubble hit the road, because in all of this, and we have to be really honest about it, there is this prospect that soldiers from the West, forces from the West, will exchange fire with Russian forces at some point.
Yep.
Now, there's absolutely no way Trump is going to allow that to happen. So the question of air cover becomes very important indeed. And, between them, the European countries have some, but you're right.
Yeah.
In normal operations, in the old pre this new era, it would have been primarily Air Force deployments from US command.
Yes, yeah.
So that's a massive problem.
Yeah.
He said, actually, this is Trump's words, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much, whatever that means. We're going to have Europe do that because we're talking about Europe as the next door neighbor.
Yeah.
So he clearly feels that no matter who is benefiting financially from this peace deal to be discussed between Ukraine and Russia, it's our job to keep the peace.
Yeah. Why is he wrong about that?
Well, he's not wrong about that.
Yeah. He's certainly playing a mischievous game because he knows full well that we're not in any position to do that.
No, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, the interesting thing, and one way to answer that is to talk about the greatness of Zelensky.
Right.
Because I think in all of this mayhem, and by the way, Zelensky will, it is under current plans, arrive in Washington tomorrow, Friday, to talk with Trump, and if things go well, to seal the deal on this apparently bizarre mineral resource deal. Yeah. And there's a little, it might seem in the weeds, but I don't think it is that Zelensky understood very early on, back in September, when we were all celebrating Kamala's brat summer and how the color green was going to defeat Donald Trump, right? Zelensky, rather more clear-eyed, thought this was not the case, and he'd probably be dealing with Trump back in the White House. And he brilliantly came up with this offer to Trump.
I didn't know this until you told me a moment ago.
Which was, look, we've got a lot of rare minerals which you were obsessed by in the first term. Maybe we could arrange something. Now, this is lithium and cobalt and things like that, things that are used in
copper and nickel
in high tech, and it's massively difficult because a lot of these resources are either in occupied Russian land or occupied by Russia, Ukrainian land, I should say, or under minefields. I mean, the logistics are a nightmare, but it piqued Trump's fancy, of course, because he hates talking about abstractions like NATO and the free world and the West, but he sure does love mineral resources and getting a piece of the rock. And what Zelensky saw, which is why he is a proper statesman, And it must cost him so much personally, given what he's been through and his people have been through. But he saw a way through this which could keep America interested.
Yes.
How, why, to what extent remains very, very much up for discussion.
So Matt, can I just point out to listeners, if it's not already clear, what you're saying is that this idea that a lot of people have described as almost kind of mafiosi bullying on Trump's behalf, demanding all of these minerals in exchange for the money that's been loaned, wasn't Trump's idea at all. Zelensky put that on the table.
Now, what happened was that Trump, as a first iteration, and very much in mob style, actually, sent out his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to Kyiv and said to Zelensky, 500 billion.
Yeah.
And Zelensky said, no way.
Yeah.
But again, Zelensky's playing this very cleverly because he knew that a huckster, a gangster like Trump would always start the bidding high.
Yeah.
And then that has now come down. And he's writing language into the deal, which includes a measure of American protection. And as Trump has said on a couple of occasions during this whole sort of high velocity geopolitical moment, he sort of indicated, look, Ukraine's going to be fine because we're going to be there mining.
Yes,
no one's going to bomb us.
And we, as we said, there is a parallel with Gaza, although Trump took it to an exponential level by, talking about pitching it high. Trump came in and said, well, we'll own Gaza, but we spoke on the podcast about, well, if American private money was being invested in the redevelopment of Gaza, then that would be a form of security for the Gazans, because Israel would think twice about knocking it all down. So that is useful thinking, I guess, in terms of a sustainable, durable security.
The difference here, I suppose, is, well, there are many differences, but one of them is, so let me get this straight. You and Putin and Ukraine, to be fair, share out the spoils of this act of rapacity. And Europe provides the blood and treasure.
We're the security guards.
We are security
guarding your minds.
So how does that work?
It's like, it reminds me a little bit of like the East India Company.
Yes.
It's that kind of thinking.
It is.
It's not.
That's exactly right. It's mercantilism.
It's not a political military invasion.
No.
It's using mercantilism, using commerce as a route into territorial expansion. And raping the territory.
And, so this is what really lies behind what Starmer and Macron and all the others are going to have to, Friedrich Merz, who's now emerged as the Chancellor in waiting in Germany, are going to have to work out is, okay, we want peace in Ukraine, but how does this work? Not quite what are we getting out of it, but how can we avoid just being, as you say, security core for America and Putin? And also, and this I will be interested to see what comes out of the Starmer meeting, is America now, well, I think I know the answer, but is America now overtly on Russia's side?
Yeah. Listen, I'll tell you what, let's take a very quick break there. Come back in a moment to further discuss. So welcome back, dear listeners. Hope you're enjoying this conversation. We live in absolutely fascinating times, and I guess it's quite important to say that nobody knows how this is playing out. But watching it evolve, I think if we'd have gone back a couple of weeks and said we'd be having this conversation now, just 2 weeks ago, it would be, people would laugh and say, don't be stupid, but we are.
We really are.
The funny thing is, Matt, that people who, as you do, pay attention over the long term, it's maybe not quite such a surprise, because this stuff has been flagged consistently as being his mindset.
And well, worse, actually, America's mindset. Because I think that, and I wrote a piece about this in the European current issue, which is that basically since Obama, explicitly, America has been pivoting away from its European responsibilities. Now, under Obama, of course, it was statesmanlike, open, there were no surprises. And he maintained very close relations with number 10 and so
He
on.
was a friend,
He was a friend, a very
an
friend.
obvious friend.
You know, came to do David Cameron a solid to argue against Brexit, all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
I like that guy, he said famously to his pollsters. So there was no kind of pulling the rug out from under us. Nonetheless, his defense secretary, Robert Gates, in 2011, and I'm paraphrasing now, said, look, you know, you need to understand, Europe, that the value for money coming out of NATO to America is terrible.
Yeah.
And there may come a time, and that time is clearly right now, when America's leaders will not necessarily, you know, regard NATO as a hill to die on. And in Trump land, it was, I mean, Trump toyed with the idea of leaving NATO in term number 1, and now he, if not leaving NATO, he's basically rendering NATO a dormant institution.
Yeah, he's completely new.
So one of the things that he said this week, which I think was quite shocking, even though in a way we know that he thinks it, was that Ukraine, quotes, forget about joining NATO.
Yeah.
Now, this is only, less than a year since the 75th anniversary of NATO summit in Washington, at which NATO agreed unanimously that Ukraine was, quotes, on an irreversible path to NATO membership.
That's right.
And NATO's biggest member has just said that's not the case.
Yeah, but also let's not forget what the underpinning all of that is. I don't think Donald Trump gives a rat's arse. If you'd have asked him,
no,
you know, before he became a politician, do you think Ukraine should be a member of NATO? He couldn't care, wouldn't know where Ukraine was.
I don't think he cares about that, and I don't think he cares about NATO.
The guy who does care about Ukraine joining NATO is one Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
So Trump is definitely dancing to Putin's tune on that. Where I kind of think that there's a great deal of naivety, and we have touched on this in the past, is people saying, oh, Trump, you know, I thought he was meant to be the great deal maker. You know, he's given away this. He's already given Putin that. He's told Putin that he's going to keep that land. Ukraine won't join NATO. He's given it all away. I think Trump, if you're looking at it purely as a deal maker, he is doing an amazing job. He's getting what he wants.
He's getting what he wants.
Every turn.
He is indifferent to Ukraine, right? I mean, he would, frankly, if Putin ended up rolling into the rest of Ukraine, I think Trump would be completely unbothered.
Yeah.
And he is completely on Russia's script. So on the NATO point, the membership of NATO, he said at this cabinet meeting, apropos of Ukraine's prospective membership, that's probably the reason the whole thing started, which is Putin's argument, which is the reason he had to go into Ukraine was because the West was aggressively trying to bring countries into the alliance.
Yeah.
This has always been the Putin argument. This is a defensive action. I'm not an aggressor. So it was amazing to hear an American president basically reading the Moscow script.
Yeah.
But then look at this week at the UN on Monday, a real day of infamy actually for America. And I say that as a massive Atlanticist.
Incredible moment. Yeah.
You know, that there were 2 votes. One is the General Assembly, which passes a resolution demanding the withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine, talks about it, war crimes and so on. 93 countries support the resolution, 65 abstain, including China. And among the 18 who oppose are Russia, North Korea, and the United States.
Incredible.
And so that was followed up by a desperate Security Council measure, which the United States won by 10-0 with 5 abstentions, including from Britain and France, that called for an end to the war, incredibly, without mentioning who started it. And this was, UN watchers say, the first time America has voted with Russia against the free world since 1945.
You know, James Ball in this week's New European writes a brilliant piece about the consequences of, you know, the very deep consequences to security from this rupture in America's attitude towards Europe for us here in the UK. But he uses this phrase that not only has Trump abandoned Ukraine, he's actually switched sides.
Yes.
You know, he has now sided with Russia.
That's the key in all this, because the special relationship, or the West, or whatever you want to call it, for all its flaws, has always had a continuity to its heart, which is that it's even at the worst moment, say the Suez Crisis in 1956, when Eisenhower is furious with Anthony Eden, it bounced back.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson was furious with Harold Wilson for Britain not joining America in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But it came back.
Yeah.
And that has always been there's been this line of continuity. That has suddenly broken.
Yeah.
And the problem with any sort of security alliance is that it relies totally for its existence, for its meaning, for its power upon a high measure of predictability.
Right.
So some people are saying, a lot of liberal copium about this, saying, oh, we just need to run out the clock. Once Trump's out of office, we'll go back to where we were. Well, there are two problems with that. First of all, no, we won't, because America actually, including the Democrats, have long been edging this way. And secondly, even if, let's say, a hawkish Democrat won the White House in 2028, which I find vanishingly unlikely, but say it happened, you can't base a relationship like that on every 4-year cycle. That's not how alliance is about. So it's gone.
Yeah.
It may be that future presidents are more amenable, more helpful, but the thing that was founded in 1949, NATO, has gone.
Yeah.
It's over.
Right. Listen, let's we've outlined some sort of cataclysmic circumstances, and a lot of it looks negative. But let's look into the future a little bit and try and work out what might be the upsides and the consequences.
Well, as I mentioned in, I think, part one, I'm very interested and cautiously excited that there's going to be a big meeting on Sunday in London of European leaders plus Zelensky, it seems, hosted by Keir Starmer, about what to do. And I think, and I may live to regret these words, but I think that moment, or moments that it leads to, could be the founding moment of a new Europe.
I agree completely. I think the European Union has been threatened across multiple fronts in the last couple of weeks, and it's demonstrated that Europe has got vulnerabilities. It's got an American vice president coming over telling us that we've got our cultures all wrong.
We're the enemy.
Our values are wrong. We've taken
We're
a
the
wrong
Reds under the bed now.
We've got economic threat. We've got Trump talking about
censors. We're
25% tariffs. We won't buy their cars,
Yeah.
so screw them. We're trying to screw them. We've got a militaristic geopolitical threat in this carve up between Russia and America. We are absolutely assailed. Now, I think it was Tanit Koch in her piece in this week's New European wrote about that a catastrophe is a place of high activity.
Yes, it's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah, and we are in a catastrophic situation, and it's going to demand a response.
Yeah.
And I think the response will almost inevitably be a reformation of some sort of the institutions of that bind Europe together. And yes, we've left the European Union in recent history, but new institutions will get formed within the heat of this catastrophe.
They absolutely have to, for the most basic of reasons, which is that the first duty of any state, and therefore states plural, is to protect their citizens from attack. And we have, at minimum, Russia in expansionist mood on our doorstep. And, for nations like Poland and Germany and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, these are not, these really are on the doorstep questions. So we have to move at light speed, at warp speed to deal with this. But I love that point by Tanit, because you never let a crisis go to waste is another way of putting it, which is that the tired argument about, is Europe too regulated? Is it devolved enough? What should it do about freedom of movement? All those remain live issues, but the key issue now is, how does Europe survive as an idea in a world of autocratic strongmen, which is a very dark prospect, but it should also be the mother of invention. There is an opportunity here for people to really step up to the plate. I mean, Macron, he may be a lame duck president, who knows, but I was very impressed by the way that he corrected Trump in the White House. And when Trump said Europe's getting its money back from Ukraine, Macron said, no, it's not actually, Mr. President.
I like that whole sequence. I like the way he put his hand on Trump's arm And he said, no.
No.
And I like the way that Trump actually deferred to the correction.
Yeah.
It gave a glimpse about how you can. I mean, I don't know how effective in the round that moment will end up being, but you can challenge Trump, and he will respond not in a defiant kind of table thumping way, but he wants to play along. He wants the conversation. He wants the game. He wants the negotiation.
Yes.
And that's, all right, that he looks like a strong bully right now, but you can negotiate with a negotiator.
You can.
That's the
but
point.
What you can't do is do it in the manner of a earnest lawyer. And this is where,
right.
I
shuddered. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen today, obviously. But I did notice that Starmer went out and said something about, well, wielding a chainsaw's not my style, ha. And I sort of thought, well, I hope Trump doesn't hear him say that, because if I was Trump, I'd say, well, I've got a fucking chainsaw, mate, and I'm bringing it to the party. So,
Yeah, if you want to turn up with a strimmer, that's up to you.
Exactly, right, exactly.
I think that Starmer has a absolutely impenetrable belief in the power of argument and calm, measured, forensic discussion. And in previous eras, that would have been excellent. But unfortunately, we now live in the age of crazy.
Yeah.
And so Macron, who's actually, a product of the liberal elite, more than even than Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
But he understands that when you go to Trump land, you have to alpha male him.
Yeah.
And he does.
Well, that's the point. Macron is an alpha male.
Macron is very much an alpha male. I mean, the scenes of them trying to outman each other with the handshakes and everything were preposterous. I mean, the testosterone is sort of fizzing off the charts. It's embarrassing. But the fact is that, when you're in the lair with Trump, there is no point in referring him to the 1949 NATO agreements.
That's right.
None of it. I mean, all that he will be interested in is Starmer for real, and what can he offer him?
Yeah.
And we know what that is. It's going to be help in golf courses, a state visit.
Yeah.
And this is the piece that worries me a bit, is that he'll bend on online safety.
Yeah.
Because it's very clear that, well, we know that
this is critical. Yeah.
the tech bros, Musk, Zuckerberg, and others, many others, are very concerned that the EU and the UK are setting up this was explicit in J.D. Vance's speech to the Munich Security Conference. They're very concerned that we are getting too regulatory on technology, and they frame this as an attack on free speech. Well, different countries have different laws, right? Yeah. We don't have a First Amendment in the EU or the UK. It's none of your business either, is my response. But I can see this, this will be very dangerous.
If you're a global tech company,
yes,
and a big part of your market is here in Europe,
yes, you don't want any of that.
And the European Union is being a pain in the arse by acting on behalf of its citizens' well-being, that's a pain in the neck for you.
It is. And Zuckerberg has cleverly, because he knows the words that trigger Trump, described the EU fines on online harms as a tariff.
That's right.
So, this is where Starmer, I hope, will hold his ground. But I noticed that in the briefing to the press that came out this morning, Number 10 sources were saying, in response to this specific point about online safety, nothing is off the table.
Yeah.
They're clearly going there pretty much with, well, what do you want? The deal on the Chagos Islands is up for grabs. This is up for grabs. So it's very important that Starmer comes away with at least the debate on the backstop, assurance, US playing some part in the defense of Ukraine on the table. Because the danger is he'll be too forensic and Trump will shut the conversation down.
And he'll bore Trump. That's the biggest risk, is he'll bore Trump.
Very, very much.
My suspicion, my feeling is that Starmer is, in this talk about we're a bridge, right?
Yes.
We're a bridge between the European Union or Europe and the United States. And I think in the past that's been true. Certainly in the past it's
very
been
much
geographically true.
That was the point of being in the EU and being us.
Exactly. Now I feel it's the basis of a fudge, which is that Starmer does not want to choose where he sits.
Yes.
Is he pro-Europe or is he pro-America? And I think this idea that he can ride two horses is increasingly mad.
I mean, this pains me because I'm, as I said in the piece, I'm a European by birth and an Atlanticist by temperament.
Yeah.
But it's over.
Yeah.
And I thought Friedrich Merz was absolutely right, or straight out the gate after the exit polls, to say, the first and most important task of the government I form will be to form an independent European defence identity.
Mate, you're brilliant, Pete. The most stark sentence I've read is one you wrote in the New European, where you said, it's the end of the West.
Yes.
This idea of the West is over. I
think if you're of our broad generation and you grew up in the 80s, and even if you weren't wild about Reagan or, Bush or whatever, America was part of your life.
Yeah.
And, American literature was part of your life. And, you've talked a lot about your love of Hemingway.
Yeah.
For me, it's Saul Bellow. We were imbued with it,
Yeah,
right?
but the reason I fell in love with Hemingway is that Hemingway loved Europe so much.
Of course. And, Bellow and Roth and a few others, Updike, they are the voice of Europe the European novel moved to America.
Yeah. Hemingway explained France and Spain and Italy to me. He made me fall in love with Europe.
There was always, and I mean, I hope culturally there remains this kind of sense of Atlanticism. Yeah. But in terms of geopolitics and institutions, it's over. And in a funny way, it's been over for a while, I think. But Trump has kind of administered the coup de grace in the most brutal and Trumpian way.
Yeah.
With a cudgel. And the only thing that can be said for that is that the clarity that it yields is undoubted. And I think you're absolutely 100% right, which is that Starmer has yet to really acknowledge that. And it is difficult for a British Prime Minister to stand up and say, because, French presidents and German chancellors are used to saying slightly snidey things about American presidents. But it has always been the way, that the UK Prime Minister is candid in private and supportive in public. Yeah. And, I'm afraid to say, and it really does pain me to say, but it is true, that those days are over.
Yeah, I think we'll know by the look on Trump's face when he comes out for the press conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, what worries me is that it will be so bland as to be meaningless.
Yeah. One other potential silver lining to all of this is Paul Mason, our columnist and a former economics editor of the BBC of Newsnight, writing in the New European and also talking on radio about if the UK is moving towards a higher defence spend, could this be the emergence of a new set of industries in the UK that would regenerate?
It could.
Old declining. We had Andy Burnham talking
about on the Monday
about
podcast.
Reinventing these old industrial areas. Paul was advocating for, could you establish an arc welding academy in the northeast of England?
I mean, what would be fantastic is if out of this came a new manufacturing base, but also a defence capability of the sort we're going to need in Europe. First of all, it's transnational. Yeah. It's not just the UK, but also it's high tech. I mean, we're going to need many, many more European satellites.
Yeah,
we're going to need a much bigger AI infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it is manufacturing jobs of the old school that perhaps we thought had gone, but also, I hope to God that the government it should concentrate on tech regulation, absolutely, but tech dynamism too. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for the defence tech sector to invest in the UK.
Yeah.
So I think that the sooner we sort of rip off the bandage, the better, because they're not going back and neither should we.
That's a great point to end this week's podcast, I think. Fascinating times we live in.
We'll be returning to this a few times, I suspect.
But one thing I want to talk about at the podcast in the future is China. And China is the big winner in all of this.
They are massively the winner. And you have to ask, and actually one would like to know a bit more sort of journalistically about it, is what's the mood in Taiwan right now?
Right, yeah, for sure. I'd be very
Not
very
happy, I
nervous,
imagine.
Yeah. Dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back on Sunday with our regular
Yep,
Q&A.
Q&A.
So if you've got any questions for us or any feedback, tell us how much you love us. Send that to 2mats@tnepublishing.com. You can even tell us if you don't love us. Some do. It's occasional. But
People
some
are
do.
saying.
People do subscribe to the New European. This offer is going to close soon. So
Yeah.
if you've got your toe in the water, you like what we say, you think you might like the New European, you will, by the way. Here's
better.
your chance. £1 for your first month.
Pound.
A pound.
A pound.
Hypothecate a pound.
Pound.
For some good journalism.
Yeah.
That's all. And then a £5 a month after that, which is still excellent value. Just have a think about how much you spend on takeaway coffee.
Fake news.
And support the good guys in building
The real
a new,
news.
strong, independent media that discusses stuff like this. A massive thank you to our production team, led by the brilliant Matt Hill.
Big thank you.
Supported by the brilliant Ollie Peart.
Thank you both.
At Rethink Audio. We love you very much. We
do.
appreciate everything you do. And until Sunday,
It's goodbye from me.
it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.